It's time to call to order our JWB Finance Committee meeting of Thursday, August 18th. And before we begin today's agenda, it's important to announce that we do not have a quorum today of our committee members. So what today's meeting will be about is to discuss the items on the agenda, certainly ask all the questions that need to be asked of staff, and then move today's agenda items of action to our board meeting on September 7th for full board approval. So with that, we'll proceed with today's meeting and start with action item, which if you're following along on the agenda, action items are number 2A, which is to approve the FY23 budget changes. And Laura Brock, do you want to take that away?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So as you're aware, the property values were certified on July 1st, and we presented that information at the July 21st board meeting, along with the proposed millage rates. JWB certified the proposed millage rates in August 2nd. That was the deadline that we had to submit that based on the forms that we had received. So we certified the proposed millage rate of 0.8508 and the rolled back rate of 0.8017. Subsequent to the June 21st meeting, we're here to just present some changes that have occurred to the budget. And in the past several years, there have been numerous changes, but we've gotten better at that over the years. And so we've only have 2 changes that were made to the budget since the last time the board saw it. One of them had to do with changing or modifying the opening fund balance amount. So the opening fund balance represents the ending fund balance from which will be the current year. And of course, more activity has occurred since then, so that opening fund balance has changed by $637,000. The other change we have deals with additional information we received from Pinellas County representing the statutory fees. That's the fee, the fee that the county charges us to collect the ad valorem taxes on our behalf. And so that expense was increased by $39,000 based on what we had budgeted. So the net effect is a nominal increase. On August 22nd, the property appraiser will be mailing out the trim notices and be notifying everyone of the initial trim hearing meeting on September 7th. The discussion for today is to talk about the proposed millage rate of 8.508 along with the budget. I wanted to point out that the forecast that's included in your packet, the changes that have been made there also included separating out the COLA and the new positions. There was a comment made at the last board meeting that those numbers had been combined. So we did separate that out in the forecast so you can see the difference between those, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I just wanted to say, I think in terms of all the iterations that we made early on in this process and all the effort that board members took to provide input, it's really kind of a joy to be able to come back today and present something that's pretty much like what we presented you last time. And we feel comfortable in the environment, which includes jurisdictions increasing rates, decreasing rates, and staying the same, all for different reasons in their different circumstances. That for us to do a partial rollback, I guess I would use the very non-financial term, but just feels right.
Right. And actually, that's where I wanted to go. I didn't see any other lights. First of all, I want to thank Laura and her team. I think we've been at this probably heartily for about 3 months. Mm-hmm. And before that, I know we started early in the budget preparation. I would tell you that it hasn't been easy. And I do want to say, even though it appears that there are not many questions today, I can assure you I was one that had the hand up, the questions, and sort of the let's dig deeper, let's get more. And so I want to thank your staff. And I also want to recognize that getting to the point that Beth just mentioned, that we were able to roll back, and based on the forecast that you and I went over just the other day, that the forecast appears to be a rollback for 2 years, and then a reassessment, which is again what the board asked for, not to roll back and come back in 6 months and start talking about pulling it back. So the fact that it's been an arduous process, lots of work went into this, and the end result is seeming to be, as Beth mentioned, a combined staff board recognition. We did the best job that we could do collectively for the taxpayers of Pinellas County. So I thank you. And with that, okay, Mr.
Yeah, as a non-voting member on this finance committee, I was willing to wait, so I didn't turn my light on. But I want to thank the financial team for doing what we asked them to do. We didn't make it easy at the last couple of board meetings. I think, had some very pointed and clearly directive conversations amongst the board members about the concerns about taxpayer dollars and how we would spend and what we had in reserves and the like. And in fact, I do remember I specifically asked to have, and I was going to give you some time, but you told me we didn't need time, that you could do this quickly, and by the next meeting we had the information we were looking for. And I think it was very clear that you understood what we were asking for, that the team really did take a good hard look and found places where we could make adjustments and where we could also reduce the impact on the taxpayers. So I thank your team for doing that. I thank you all for taking the time to focus on those, not just kind of gloss over and say we can't do it, or just make a haphazard adjustment. I think you did a great job. It was very clear that this had to be 2 years. We made it very clear during the meeting that we weren't going to accept anything that wouldn't extend for at least 2 years before we take another review at it. I think what you've done is exactly that, and I think you've given us enough time as a board to really hone in on the issues, hone in on seeing what the newest projects and programs will bring forward, and allow us to be in a position in the next couple of years to reassess. But during that time, we will have made a very nice impact to the taxpayers of Pinellas County, and without impacting the support that we give to the children. So again, thank you to the team for all the hard work that you've done in putting this together.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Okay, Beth, one.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing. There are a whole variety of assumptions and best estimates that are within this budget. The one that I think many of us internally will be watching really closely relative to the impact the Juvenile Welfare Board can have on the community in the ways it wants to, given its strategic plan, are the new strategic initiatives that are going through the process of request for proposal. The first batch has gone past the letter of intent stage and are moving on towards RFP. And then, and I'm catching Diana off guard, but Diana, when will that batch come back to the board? Will that be December? Tell me in just a minute. Okay. These are staggered. One is for the first three, which include early childhood development, where there were the most significant number and dollars of programs, prevention of child abuse and neglect, and strengthening communities. And then we have just received the letters of intent and are early in its process for school readiness and school success. But the first three. The first one will come back in December to the board. Okay. In February, and actually that'll be a much extended implementation for that second one so that it'll be ready to go to contract the following March or so that it can be ready for the beginning of school, September of 24, those school focused ones. But I would just want to say that while we haven't gone through the review process yet, we have kind of taken out those that had what in this business we call fatal flaws. They came in late, they weren't signed, or they absolutely did not, in the most part, they did not fit the strategic plan and the strategic goal that we were talking about. But after those were called out, there were a significant number of what appear at this stage of the game to be very appealing projects with a pretty hefty dollar tag as well. And so the internal group has said, well, so what if, we have whatever it is, $5 million to deal with within the budget, but we come back and we see $8 million worth of programs that are really strong and really good and we really think would put us forward. Internally, what I've said is, let's show that in all honesty to the board, and it's ultimately the board's decision as to where they want to fall on that. And by then, again, we'll know more things about inflation. We'll know more things about our lapse this year and next year and so on. It is difficult to put out new programs and not have significant lapse because it takes time for them to get up and going. So we're still going to have a lot of those numbers running back and forth. And we tried to put together a budget that would comport with what's going to happen this year, but I can guarantee there will be some of those items like the one I just stated where actual performance will differ from predicted, whatever they say at the end of all those drug ads. Actual performance will not comport with what we planned.
Just to echo those comments, so in line with not knowing how many new programs and the dollar amounts and the volume, we are looking at the staffing needs accordingly, because you can't overnight, have enough staff to handle all of these new programs and onboard them and implement them. So we have staggered. Last year, we added some staff. We've budgeted staff for the next year. So we're trying to posture ourselves to be ready to be up and running when those programs come on board.
It'll be handled wonderfully. And so at this point, again, a reminder, we don't call for a vote, even though they're action items, because we do not have a quorum. So we'll move on to action item B for discussion. Laura, back to you regarding the Finance Committee meeting schedule.
Yes, so we've put together a proposed dates for the Finance Committee, and traditionally these need to coincide when there's action that needs to be taken. So the February meeting is the meeting that the external auditors come and present. We try to have that one at the end of the month to give them time to complete the audit and be ready for that presentation. The April, June, and August meetings are all tied into budget decisions and review. So not being able to have a vote on this, we could circulate this to the Finance Committee members to get approval. I'm not sure it would need to go to the board for action, but that's a Colleen question.
So Colleen, can we get a vote electronically from the Finance Committee members on these dates so that we can go for approval?
You can't take a vote electronically, but if it's something about scheduling meetings, if staff sends an email out saying, I'm proposing these meeting dates, let me know if anybody has any problems with them. This is not something that truly requires action.
A board vote.
It doesn't even require a Finance Committee vote. It just really requires you guys all agreeing that these are good dates for you.
Okay. On a personal note, every year I say the same thing. We do not have a board meeting in August. It does give board members the opportunity to travel, and so it's difficult to see the finance meeting in August, but I understand the reason why. So there you have it. No other comments? We'll move on to action item C, which is to approve recommended revisions to board policies. Laura, we're coming back to you for that.
Thank you. So our discussion today is to review the board policies. The last revision was in December of 2020, and we try to get through these on an annual basis. The changes before you today, some of them have been cosmetic. They've just been updates and clarifications. We did try to take a good look at the definitions and try to organize it in a manner that was easily to read. The draft that you have, the red line draft, identifies items that have been struck as well as items that have been added, and you can see the different colors relative to that. And then the memo before you identifies items that, and I had used the word substantive, and maybe the better word to use would have been important as far as items to highlight to you. And the first one I'll call your attention to, having to do with attendance relative to the board members as well as extenuating circumstances. And this item is a clarification. Nothing's really changed with that. This is the verbiage that Colleen has provided to us that is approved by the
Sure. So
statute. I'll let you.
yeah, let me
talk
jump
about
in. The memo kind of oversimplifies it. It's somewhat of a more complicated issue, but we've had in our bylaws since I've gotten here, and it is the law, that if we have a quorum in the room and someone has extraordinary circumstances, then they can participate and vote by telephone. So the Attorney General has really only ever identified someone being ill. There have been a few cases. There's been a city committee, county commissioner, and there's been a city advisory committee member that we have 2 AGO opinions where they were both ill, unable to make it. Attorney General said those are extraordinary circumstances. They can participate and vote at that meeting. However, they don't count for quorum. So we still need to have our quorum in the room, which is what our bylaws say, and which is what actually the policy says. I think the little bullet point just oversimplified it and may have caused some confusion.
Right.
So we've always had that policy. It's always been in our bylaws. It just hasn't necessarily been in the policies. Now, if you're traveling and you want to call in and listen and find out what's going on at the meeting, that's perfectly fine. It's just that that's not extraordinary circumstances such that you can vote.
But if we are traveling and want to participate by phone, I mean, even participating in the meeting is questionable because, you know, participating in the meeting could sway
Correct.
opinions. So I would say, is that permissible?
We have had situations where people have been traveling and have called in to listen in and have said a word or two, and I don't find that to be a problem. I believe that, you know, full-on participation and trying to sway a vote by a board member who
Right.
would not be in the room would not honor the
I
spirit
would
of the
agree.
law.
Okay.
Yes.
And because I know I've had to participate by phone and just to participate, but again, it's the respectful of the intent of the law as
Correct.
well.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think the important piece is that there first has to be a quorum in place so that we can have the meeting. And then participation from outside can happen. That's where I struggle because I didn't quite pick up on having the quorum first. And it's like giving the opportunity to participate and vote in a meeting. I questioned, you know, how do we really understand what extenuating circumstances
Right,
are?
and you're exactly right, and that would violate the law. And
Right.
the AGO has said that extraordinary circumstances means somebody is ill and unable to make it to the meeting because of that illness. And so that would be extraordinary circumstances where they could then vote if we did have our quorum in the room, which is our 6 people. We need to have 6 people here before that is even a possibility.
Okay.
And Susan, I want to respond to your comment. Our policy right now reads that board members who are unable to attend a scheduled meeting but wish to make their position known on a specific agenda item or have a question should contact the CEO regarding that matter and submit in advance information regarding that. So if there is a specific item on the agenda that you would want to speak to, you're more than welcome to provide a written statement to the CEO
Correct.
in your absence.
And that's an exception called the one-way communication rule. So a board member can issue a one-way communication and an order, and we've always had this as well too. I was trying to remember, I think Commissioner Welch, or Mr. Welch, Mayor Welch, when he was a commissioner and was on our board, he used it a few times when he could not make it. But in order to make certain nobody hits reply to all, we would ask that you send it to the CEO and then she can disseminate it so that we don't run afoul of the sunshine that way. But that is also always an option, and that does become a public record, obviously, as soon as it's emailed in.
So other items to address here is the funding process. We wanted to expand the reasons for funding reductions or terminations to include the CEO some leeway relative to that decision-making process. Under eligible recipients, we've made some changes for there as well. One is to to add an exception for licensed regulated professionals. In the last year or so, we have started to fund for-profit organizations, and some of them require a few different things than the traditional not-for-profit and government agency that we have funded. And so item G is to add determination on financial stability to allow the CFO a little more leeway in looking at financial stability. Specifically, when we've always required, for example, an external audit from the not-for-profits and the governments. Well, if you're dealing with a medical practice, they don't have an audit, but I would like to see something. So we changed the audit requirements as well for the for-profits to allow them to provide a compilation or a review or other type of financial information, which is standard in their industry, and not requiring them to go out and get an annual audit per se. So that was modifying the language on subparagraph I. Subparagraph K, we have a current, on the books, we have a policy now that reads, if you're a funded agency with revenues of less than $500,000, then you are required to be in an ASO, which is an administrative service organization. Currently, we've got some of those agencies that are in the ASO that have exceeded that revenue amount to date, and we have other small agencies that are not in the ASO. So we are kind of not adhering to that policy. We would like to remove that requirement that they be in an ASO. Certainly, when we issue an RFP, we're going to ask for questions like, are you in a co-op, or do you have a sponsoring organization? I'm still going to want to look at some financial information to determine stability and so forth before we were to fund an organization. But we felt like that we were not following that policy, and so a change would be in line.
And I think that what I pushed back on this for a long time, just so you know, so they really had to convince me. But I ultimately was really convinced that we had larger organizations, sometimes who were under an ASO, who got into all kinds of trouble, even though they were an ASO, and even though they were a bit larger than some of our smaller organizations or middle-sized organizations who did not use an ASO. In other words, the ASO wasn't the insurance we thought it was for keeping everything on the up and up and keeping the agencies following the procedures that they were following. And unfortunately, and there's no point in pointing fault one way or the other, but then we had three parties involved, at least, JWB and the agency and the ASO, and a lot of finger pointing in different directions as to who really caused what. And we were spending, pretty much top dollar for the kind of services the ASO was providing, as opposed to, for instance, having a part-time bookkeeper, which would have been a more typical way to fill most of the jobs, the work that the ASO was doing. Further, JWB would go through, and it would be time to go through the RFP for the ASO. So we chose the ASO, and then to the degree the agencies didn't like the ASOs, it was our fault. And so we just found a lot more messiness and a lot less benefit than we'd hoped. Diana, is that a fair statement? You lived it.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Right, so the proposed revisions would strike that requirement. In the ineligible expenses, there's some exceptions, again, for the nonprofit organizations. They don't have they're not a 501c3 organization with a tax-exempt sales certificate exemption, so we would give them an exception for them to get reimbursed for sales tax. We did not want to allow gas cards to be an allowable expense. It's kind of hard to control, who gets the gas cards and how they're being used. And then capital, what we're finding is some of the agencies were trying to utilize repair and maintenance to include capital items when they should be using the capital RFA for that. And our allocation should be more focused on the program operating budget. So that was another item. But of course, we wanted to include some sort of approval process for the CEO if there was a situation where something might be eligible to meet that need. And then the last item in the ineligible was on clarifying supporting documentation for salary adjustments. And in the past, over the years, we had required that they provide us with board minutes. And what we have found is acceptable if they could provide us with their salary form that's signed that usually goes in a personnel file. And if they're following their own internal policies, then that would be acceptable for us. The next item on item 5.7 is J, the portfolio composition, where we're suggesting that we can increase the investments in the intercompany governmental pools to 100%. Our maximum right now is at 75%. That wouldn't necessarily mean that we would put everything at 100%, but it certainly would give us some leeway because I know there are some months that we are over that threshold. And then the last item in item 6-6 under advances, we have provided advances to our agencies, and in particular the NFCs, the Neighborhood Family Centers. And at the time, the advance maximum threshold was $100,000, or not to exceed 25% of their annual allocation. And over a period of years, the allocations have increased, but that maximum has not. And we have had some agencies that are having some difficulty with cash flow situations, and so we think that the 25%, not to exceed 25%, or $250,000 would be a more reasonable threshold. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're opening the floodgates for everyone, but if somebody has a need to increase their advance, we certainly don't want to preclude them to be able to pay their insurance policies or pay their salaries and so forth. Any comments or questions on these items?
No, once again, no vote, and this will proceed to the full board for approval on September 7th. And thank you. Again, a very delicate task. I appreciate that this is done. How often are the board policies reviewed? Do you have it in your?
We try to do it on an annual basis. The last one was December of 20.
I would say this was a much deeper dive
Right.
than the last two times. I mean, we reviewed it, but
Right.
this time we really looked at it.
Right.
It took several minutes. This was a much deeper dive.
Right. I appreciate that because as a funded agency, it was required that we review our policies annually, and it's a big task, but I appreciate that JWB also goes through that same exercise. All right, we are action item D, which has to do with updating and approving, which not today, the personnel policies, and we switch. Laura, you're done. We're over to Linda. Thank you, Linda, and I see Sabi's here, so thank you.
Yeah, more policies, personnel policies is what we're going to talk about this afternoon. You may recall that we did present revisions to the personnel policies to the full board in December. And the two new policies presented at the time were paid parental leave and telework. And at that meeting, the board did approve those policies along with some smaller changes that we made, but also asked that in the future, a smaller committee review the personnel policies before they come to the board. And they didn't designate what kind of committee, so we ultimately determined that it should be the Finance Committee. So you are the lucky ones. Also at that meeting, the board requested that these policies be reviewed in 9 months. And as this is August, and that was December, here we are. Time to review. So the good news is we don't have any new policies other than an addition to our telework policy and then some smaller changes that I'll go through as well. But just to remind everybody why we put forward the telework and the paid parental leave policies. The paid parental leave really germinated because of two reasons. What we've all learned collectively about the importance of the first 3 years of life, 0 to 3, has raised our consciousness, so much so that now we have a campaign called Turbo Babies to educate the rest of the community about the importance of 0 to 3. So we thought we really needed to lead by example and really allow our staff who are having babies or newly adopting children to be able to bond in that first year with their children. So that's 6 weeks of paid parental leave for either the mother or the father. Our fatherhood initiative also highlights the importance of fathers in children's lives. And so we thought the paid parental leave would also be an example to others and particularly to the JWB male staff, that they're important too, and we want them to spend time with their newborns as well. So we haven't had anybody take advantage of the policy just yet, but we do have one staff that we know of who is expecting. The telework policy was recommended really because staff surveys indicated that staff liked working in a remote environment. They were highly productive in a remote environment, and also just the fact of the labor shortage. It's become a recruitment tool. New employees are looking for that flexibility. However, we are adding in the policy a requirement for residency. We do think it's important for JWB staff to have an understanding of Pinellas County and what we're all about. So we are requiring all staff to live within a 2-hour commute of JWB, give or take, depending on time of day and traffic. And we were getting some applications from folks from Texas and California, and we're like, no, they're not really going to understand who we are if they live that far away, and they wouldn't be able to come to the office for mandatory meetings readily. We also implemented, on concert with the telework policy this year, return to office guidelines, which really put some structure for our staff around the who, when, and why. You know, we know that relationships are critical to our successful collaboration and our unified spirit, you know, our JWB culture. And we also know that for new employees, it's very important for them to get integrated into that culture as soon as possible. So we have implemented some requirements for staff to come in for certain meetings and activities. But lest you think that this building has been empty all year, let me assure you that this is not. Of course, all of our procurement meetings have been public and in this building since the end of 2020. Sabi and her HR team are in most days of the week doing all things HR, including in-person onboarding. Some executive team members and managers are now meeting in the office frequently. This summer, we hosted a manager training where all managers were required to attend, and we've been having some unit, department, and cross-departmental meetings as well. You know, we're really trying to strike a balance with this hybrid arrangement, and it seems to be working well, but certainly almost every applicant that applies wants to know what the physical requirements are for being in an office or not. So we're answering the question honestly. There's remote, but there's also some requirements for you to be in the office. Does anybody have any questions about those policies in particular?
I was just going to say, there's no doubt that we have lost some candidates who absolutely wanted to work from fill in the blank, from somewhere else. And we just didn't feel like that made sense for us, for both the reasons that Linda stated. One, that relationships across the organization is helpful and builds trust that then builds better work. And the other, while we couldn't say, given housing prices and so on, you have to live in Pinellas County, we really are an MSA that includes 3 to 5 counties. And we already have lots of employees who live in South Hillsborough or North Hillsborough for that matter, or Manatee or Pasco. But for somebody to be living in this area, this MSA, to be more aware of what's going on here, just seemed important for all kinds of ways that maybe you can't quite put your finger on it, but you know it's real. So those were our reasons for making those kind of choices.
Just has nothing to do with questioning that. I believe you're right. Do we know what percentage of employees live either in Pinellas or outside of Pinellas that work? Do we have that information? Just curious. Has nothing to do with what the policy is. I don't disagree with it.
I would say the majority is Pinellas County.
I would say majority, but we do have Hillsborough, and like Beth said, we know we've got Manatee and Pasco.
Yeah. I can look around the room and I see 2 Hillsborough people at the table, so I know that we certainly have some Hillsborough folks.
Yeah, just a question of curiosity.
I think more are in Pinellas, but either because it's where they first lived when they moved to the community, or spouses work somewhere else, or whatever. You know, we certainly have some long-term employees who live, for instance, in South Tampa.
Well, and we also know we've got some younger employees who have tried to buy housing, and they can't afford it in Pinellas, so they've gone elsewhere.
Right. I was just going to add, in my unit of 12 or 13, I think I have 5 that live outside of Pinellas, either North Tampa, South Tampa, Manatee. But it's not, you know, to get over the bridge from West Shore is not that.
Yeah, I mean, it's regional, it's close, you know, it's
Correct.
within region, feel and touch. You know, if you're in Texas, there's a little other issue, but, yeah.
All right, so the rest of the changes to the policies are fairly small. Like Laura and her group, we added some definitions that we realized were missing. We've revised language where staff have been confused or misinterpreted a policy, so we clarified the language. Or where HR has noticed there were some inconsistencies between 2 different policies. Or where Colleen said, the law's changed, let's fix that. So I'm happy to walk through the table, the chart of changes if you want. It'll take you just a minute, unless you don't want to. It's up to you.
And I am too.
I am too. Again, the protocol for us is to have a conversation with the manager in charge. I know I didn't have it with you, I did have it with Laura, but, you know, as a member of the board since 2015, much of this is appreciated to review it on a periodic basis to make the changes that need to be made. And so, to me, that's more important, and the more important revisions are being reviewed with us. So I also don't feel the need to go through it policy by policy. You're good? Okay. And now, not to say that another board member prior to September 7th may want that, of course, but you'll be prepared for that at that time.
And that's why we put this table together, that it gives the explanations for all the changes that are, you know, pretty self-explanatory, but it's certainly, I'm happy to discuss any of them.
Right.
So the one area I would just always continually kind of see an update on is the remote. You know, I think it's me personally think it's extremely important that you collaborate and get together more as often as possible. I know it's hard anymore, and since COVID, people have gotten comfortable not being in an office space. I think we have to prepare to change that a bit. I don't know what the right mix is. And so as you keep looking at it, I think you're going to be tweaking it as we go.
Well, and we are reading every article that comes out on this to figure out what the rest of the nation's doing.
Coming from the CDC.
No,
All kinds of sources.
all kinds. All right, so the no action, we'll just take these to the board in December.
And again, thank you. A great deal of work went into this. I'm looking at both of you, you and your teams. I get that. And I think just to back up Mr. McCurrick, I know I've mentioned it before. I'm very much in favor of the virtual workforce, but I also want to be sensitive because we are a governmental agency using taxpayer money, and we can see the quality and the volume of work that's being done. But I think it's something that we just keep our ear and our eye to the hoofbeats out there, that it is a little click off from other governmental agencies, in particularly the Tampa Bay area that I'm aware of. So given that, I think we just be aware of that and make ourselves available to the people we serve.
Of course. If I could also add, Pinellas County does have a 3-day-a-week remote policy as well. So they're, you know, everybody's experiencing some turnover and some trying to, you know, there's fewer people for more jobs. So we're all trying to make adjustments.
All right, then we're ready to go on to section 3 of today's agenda, which is the discussion areas. And Laura, you're going to walk us through the monthly financial and investment report for June and July.
Correct. Thank you. So before you, you have both the statements for June and July. The June statements were provided at the last board meeting. I'm more than happy to have a more thorough, detailed discussion on June at this particular meeting, but I'll take the time to focus on July since they're the more current financials. The statement of position or the balance sheet, there's no material changes to the balance sheet. On the income statement or the profit and loss statement, just reminding you that the period ending July is 10/12 of our year, which would be approximately 83% of our budget. And also wanting to remind you that our program expenses are kind of a month behind because the reimbursements come in the subsequent month. So the reimbursements that you're looking at represent about 75% of the fiscal year, which would be 9 months. Revenues are definitely in line with what we had budgeted, and in comparison with the prior year, it's about a 7.2% increase over the prior year, just about $5.7 million. On the program expenses, although we have spent to date 58% of our budget, we have spent more this year to date than the average previous 9 months. So when we calculate our budget, we don't do 1/12. You know, I didn't like that approach. So the staff is taking an average from the previous years because of our cyclical nature of expenditures for some of our programs. Some have more expenses in the summer, some have more expenses, you know, when the school's in and so forth. So I guess I could say I'm happy to say, I mean, we've spent $1.5 million more than we did based on that calculation from the previous years, and about $2.1 million more than what we had spent a year ago. So that's demonstrating that we are trying to spend that money and getting it out. And keep in mind, even with that $2 million variance from the prior year, that includes a decrease in the Early Learning Center of about $1.8 million. So we had a decrease of $1.8 million in the Early Learning Center. We had about $1 million increase in behavioral health and in the food initiatives as well. So I guess I'm saying it's good news. I mean, we're still showing that there will be lapse, and that's something we continue to monitor. But those are my observations from looking at the statement of activities, or otherwise known as the profit and loss statement. The other statement I'll call your attention to is the investment statement. We are required to provide an investment report each month, and you'll notice that we do now have funds invested with FL Class. That was the new intergovernmental fund that we approved. So we've got $25 million invested with them. So we have 3 pools now, and so we had a rate of return, or our earnings this month we yielded was $105,000, which is great for 1 month. And you know, we had budgeted $100,000 for the year, and we're at $270,000. So we are making progress, but not nearly what the markets used to be years ago. So currently, when we were talking about the exposure in our asset allocation, we've got about 72.9 or 73 million in the 3 pools, which is earning obviously more than if it's just sitting in a checking account. And just to remind you that all of those funds are liquid. So everything is liquid. So if we needed to move money out, you know, we can move it out at no problem. So again, happy to answer any questions on either of the financials.
Okay. Then I'll turn it over to Beth for the Chief Executive Officer's update.
I just have two things. One, it's always fun to have a ribbon cutting. And sure enough, we had a ribbon cutting at Lemon Street for the new R Club Early Learning Center. And that's 2 months. I learned there's a difference between 2 months and 8 weeks. So this is 2 months to 2 years. That's from a licensing perspective, I'm sure. And Karen, can you remind me how many classrooms there are in that center?
2 per age group.
Okay, so 4?
Infant, yeah,
Oh.
we have 2 infants, 2 1s, and 2 2s.
Okay, so 6 classrooms. It was a facility they owned before and had some pre-K kids and so on. So they transformed all of it to serve the youngest kids. So 2 baby rooms, 2 toddler rooms, onesies, and then 2-year-olds. And for a very long time, it's been the case that there's been a shortage in high-quality services for those age kids. That's been a long time running. And then I think as Linda may have noted, every time we turn around, we learn how much more important it is that the youngest kids get high-quality care and are hearing, lots of vocabulary and all of that sort of thing. So the qualifications of the teachers there are that they are bachelor's trained. That is not typical in a lot of particularly infant environments. Our club has a great reputation with us and beyond in running good centers. So we're real excited. It took the better part of a year for us to make the selection and for them to contract and then for them to renovate the space and move kids out that were already in and that sort of thing. But it's been in operation since August 10th. And then we just had the ribbon cutting earlier this week. Anything else you want to add, Karen?
No, it was just exciting to see infants because previously they did not have infant capacity at that center. So when we were able to be there, we saw a little baby, and it's just exciting to see, as we know that is an age group here in Pinellas County that we have challenges serving. So it's just exciting.
And just by way of background, you may remember this was one of the pieces of the early childhood development strategic area was to see more quality early learning centers, and as opposed to going out with a full RFP. I think Diana Caro said, last time we did this, we did all the work, we sent it out, and nobody came to the party. And so what we really ought to do first is find out among the usual suspects who's even interested, because it takes a lot of things, including having a facility at hand that they could make work. And our club was the only respondent at that point in time. So it saved us and them a whole lot of time not to go through a deeper process. They are certainly known well to us. We were able to immediately begin moving into planning. And now I can only hope that we'll be able to, I was greedy. I was there saying, oh, this is great. Now, when's the next one? But I do suspect that there may be some spots at Happy Workers where there are a lot of classrooms that there may be that possibility of adding. And Happy Workers is at, I don't know, I want to say.
It's in South St. Pete.
It's in South St. Pete, 4th
Yeah.
Street South and maybe 18th Avenue South, something
We
like that.
actually have an actual application from our club for the Happy Workers.
Okay, so I shouldn't say anymore.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
may.
They've already,
So it's within this batch.
yeah,
Didn't our club take over Happy Workers?
Yes.
they did, but they're talking specifically about doing the quality early learning center there.
Okay.
So it's not just a regular program, but the enhanced program.
But yes, to your point, Happy Workers has been a long time beloved facility within the African-American community in South St. Pete and struggled financially over, it struggled and then it'd kind of barely make it back up and struggle again. They just had a hard time, and a facility that much of which was really in bad shape.
Well, I think it's incredibly great because of the fact that Art spent so much hard time
Yes.
and his effort into bringing, because Happy Workers was about ready to be closed completely.
A couple of times.
Right.
Yes,
And if it
a
wasn't,
couple of times.
Art stepped in, and I had visited with him numerous times as he was under construction and redoing things. And I mean, he put his heart and soul into that. So to
Yes.
see this happening, it's really good.
And I think they may have some grants right now, CDBG or otherwise, to do some more of what they need to do there. I'm not sure. But it's been, it was a huge lift. And from what I know, they're really making it, but I probably shouldn't say anything more since they're proposing something to us. But anyway, but that was, that was just fun to see the Tarpon Springs, all kinds of folks from Tarpon Springs, from the mayor and the city manager and a commissioner and so on, were all there, very excited to see it. So really the second thing to mention to you, and we did not have time to come to a committee or to the board before we needed to make a statement to our providers about this. The Juvenile Welfare Board typically does, it's not entitled, it doesn't have to, but typically does a capital RFA every fall. That's varied in dollar amount, but we budgeted it for the coming year to be $1,750,000. And but what we learned a week and a half ago, maybe, was that the county, using ARPA funds and going through the community foundation, the Pinellas Community Foundation, who the county has used before as a mechanism to evaluate and distribute funds. We're going to be releasing a granting opportunity to support capital needs of nonprofit organizations. And the only difference, two differences. One difference is that there needed to be some indication that either the need or the lack of funding to meet the need was due to COVID. And that could look a lot of different ways. They've given out some information to indicate all of the different ways in which that might have shown up. We couldn't do our annual fundraiser 2 years in a row because of COVID. It could be for a variety of reasons. So, but the dollars are significant, and the time frame is this fall, exactly. Well, actually starting earlier then, but certainly overlapping when we would typically put out our RFA. So they offer two different grant-making tracks. One is small capital purchases and the other large capital projects. The total dollar amount is $17.9 million. Now, granted, this is for any nonprofit in the county, whereas ours is only for those agencies that we fund. But our budget for this year was $1,750,000, and here's $17 million, so or almost $18 million. So there's a lot there. What we didn't want to see was agencies try to apply for both literally at the same time and then not know which they were going to take, and having lapse in one or lapse in the other, and create that confusion. And so what we decided to do, so we're really reporting to you that we did, was to delay our RFA and wait and see how the county's process works. I think the biggest question that we know of right now is, will there be agencies who would otherwise have qualified for us but didn't get money through the county for some reason, in particular, perhaps the COVID impact requirement? Other than that, it would appear to us that if it's a good project, if it'd be a good project in our process, it ought to look like a good project for their process. The only other potential exception is that one of the areas that we've been leaning in on, wanting to fund, are data systems owned by or leased by, used by our agencies, so that they don't use our system as their data system, but that they own their own data, they use their own data actively, and then for us to get their data is a much smoother process, is a download, is a data transfer, whatever. So that would be something we find special value in that this county process might not. So it's going to be a wait and see. We have continued to include that $1,750,000 in the budget. The timing is not absolutely clear because the county is going to go through a process, and then depending on money they have left, they may go through a second process. So, you know, what seems most likely to me will be one of a couple things. Either they will go through their process this fall, and it's a pretty quick process, by the way. They released it August 8th, I think. I'm close. And okay. And it had 5 weeks before submissions were due. So it's a pretty fast turnaround, and we felt that we needed to alert our agencies. If our expectation was that they file for those and not just wait around for ours, that we needed to tell them that. And so we did. I think we got something out in communication maybe late that Monday, maybe early Tuesday, but all but the time that it was being released, so that they knew that we had that expectation, and that when we do our RFA, we will be asking, did you apply for the county funding? And if not, why not? They might have a good reason why not. You know, they might have said, we didn't qualify for any of the COVID impact scenarios, and they can tell us that. So we're going to be watching and waiting and acting accordingly. It could well be that we issue our RFA sometime next winter, if in fact the counties has completely wrapped up by then. It could be that we roll more of it into the following year because the county has a second, well, actually I think they call it the fourth round, but anyway, it's 2 or 3 rounds this fall and then another round. We also would have to be mindful, I mean, it's sort of like a detail, but it's also mindful that even right now, our agencies are having a hard time getting the money spent within the fiscal year, in particular because of supply chain problems. And if we, and that's assuming we made the, you know, we went our normal schedule, and I think we would grant in December, typically. If we, released in the fall and granted in December. But here, if we didn't even release it till January or February, there's no way that agencies would be able to spend all of those dollars. So depending on that timing, it could be that it rolls into next year altogether. It could be that we say you can begin spending money in July, but we will budget monies going into the next year as well. No, Laura, do you want to correct me anywhere I may have misspoken? Or?
No, I think the good point to highlight is based on the timing on when we release our RFA and when the awards would be issued, is more than likely that it's not going to be spent by the end of September. And we ran into that problem this current year that we're in, and we did reach out to the agencies who are not able to, that will not be able to spend their allocated capital by next month. And we budgeted for that carryover next year. It was about $450,000. So it'd be interesting to see how this one pans out.
The only something I think we might want to consider as we look forward with this is assuming that our agencies do apply and they do use, they go to get some of those fundings. Once we see what they've applied for and what they're being funded for, is there an opportunity for us to adjust what we're going to fund for so that we're not doing an overlapping of any kind of funds for specifically same type of programs or projects? Maybe we can then turn around and adjust what we're funding for to fit the next tier need or the next, another level, which would still, which would be even more beneficial for them, so that we're not trying to give them, funding for the same project that they may have already gotten funded for or something similar, and they never really get to use it properly. So I think if we can kind of, as we see this roll out, is there a way of us readjusting what we'll fund for? I think it could be really helpful.
And if I remember correctly, and Diana, we always put you on the spot, isn't their project limit higher than ours?
Yeah, ours is a max request of 150,000, and for the county's small purchases, the max request amount is 200,000. So there's a couple little differences between theirs and ours that we'd like to see what the results turn out to be, to see if maybe we would recommend to you next time that if there's, you know, a lot of, you know, requests that are coming in that $150,000 to $200,000 range, we may want to consider upping our max in the future. It's an opportunity for us to learn and possibly make some recommendations to change ours.
I'm not sure, I'm listening to all of this, and I'm putting my head back as an agency exec in a very old building, very old. And so I would expect that the contract managers, if that's this terminology, Karen, working with the agencies so that we can watch what's been funded by the county. But if an agency is in, and I don't want to call it a crisis mode because they'd communicate with JWB in a different way, but if there's a critical need that they're not eligible for county money, and we're holding back a little bit to find out what's going on before we go, I would like us to be sensitive that if there's a critical need out there, that we just need to be aware of that. But I do understand the preventing of the duplication of asks, and I understand that. But I all of a sudden, I'm sitting here thinking about my building roof, and I'm thinking about this and that, and just making sure that our contract managers that are in a tighter relationship with an agency are well aware of what's going on. At the same time, you're monitoring the county money. Just a point made, okay?
Yeah, I think, at least my impression is, by and large, you know, our agencies are struggling with old buildings that have all kinds of issues attached to them. And in particular, if the larger of these county funding opportunities is able to really help them make a difference on those, that in the same year they may need those things happening, they may still need a new van to transport kids or computers to replace their laptops, or so I don't see it as an either or. There are different kinds of projects, and you know, we just want to make sure that nobody's in the position of having to struggle through picking and choosing two funding opportunities at the same time.
But that's why I was saying if we could start to maybe look at what they hadn't been funded for, and then look in those spaces in that area to see, is there something else that we can fund that we would have probably funded to help them fix their roof, but if they've got the roof fixed already, then maybe we can help them fix an air conditioner, or buy a new one, or a van, or those things. That would allow them to even get that much more in the year, you know, and luckily the county is already, you know, is stepping up to do these things. So the combination of the two could really provide a tremendous amount of additional value.
And we're relatively broad across those things, but it might be worth us looking at what are the kinds of things we typically don't fund. And is this a time we might, you know, change our guidelines? And I'm not sure what that would be, but it's worth thinking through that.
So I'm going to switch subjects on you just real quickly now that we have Chief Milliken. Did everything go well?
Yes, sorry. Duty calls.
No. But now that you actually do have a quorum, do you want to rethink of maybe going back?
Wait a sec. We
I just
cannot
asked.
even have a finance committee meeting unless there is a quorum present. So what you've all just done is just discussion in a publicly noticed meeting, which is perfectly appropriate. You can now call to order and have your finance committee, but the law says that we have to go through all these items. You can't just summarily vote once you get a quorum.
No,
So either she can redo her presentations for everything, or you could just wait and do it all at the board meeting, whichever is more expeditious for all of you.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Your call.
Yeah. I look to Beth.
I mean, you are gonna have to go through it all at the board meeting again anyways for really all of the action items, except for setting the committee meeting schedules. So Laura or whomever's gonna have to present A, C, and D at the board meeting. So it's really what you want, but we can't just come in and take a vote now that we do have
Right,
a
so in
program.
other words, we would have to stop our discussion and reopen. We would have to, we did not have
Call
a meeting.
Perhaps calling the meeting and setting the finance agenda, schedule of meetings, just doing that one item. So so that, because that's really within the purview of this group.
Okay, but I'm going to hold for a moment, being that I have the.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold for a moment and go back to Beth, because I'd like to finish the Chief Executive Officer's report and see if you had any other items to discuss during your report.
I'll add one more. Those were the two important ones. The third, not unimportant. This room, what day was it that you did your carnival? Last Thursday, you would have thought you were at a kid's carnival. So the administrative department, which includes everybody who works for Linda, turned this place into a very fun place to come. And typical of those who are with kids, there were games you would play and you could win, but you got a ticket just for participating. But, if you won, you got other things. So they had trivia things, they had bowling balls, they had ring toss. The trivia was wonderful. It was all about JWB employees that were in the room. And Becca did two of those things. She did essentially a playlist. She got music or songs from everybody within that department. They just suggested one they loved, one that they remember from high school, whatever. They wanted to just their walk-on music if they ever, needed walk-on music. So that was played in the background. It was, I would just have to say, it was just fun. And was a great opportunity for that whole group of people to just spend time together. And through the trivia piece, certainly learned things about each other that none of us ever knew. Somebody lived on a sailboat for 3 years. Who knew? And all kinds of things. So that's the only other thing I'd add.
Before we leave then, I just have a question. I know at the board meeting, we sometimes get updates on programs that are in corrective action or performance. And so before we get to the board meeting, is there any update that you might have for us today to just share with us before we sort of end our discussion and open a finance meeting?
I'll take a first stab at a few, and you play cleanup batter. How's that? Because I know you'll remember more of them. There was an additional licensure, occurrence or response for the YMCA Lilman. Apparently, a 5-year-old, I think, was left in or a kiddo was left in the room for 5 minutes as the teacher took the other kids out. And no harm, but they did report it, as they are supposed to do. And so they are on the edge with licensure.
Correct. They're on probation with PCLB at the current time. So we will be, this was an organization that we did have on corrective action, or a program that we had on corrective action for about, I think it was 18 months. They came off of it in December of 2021. And so, but according to licensing, if they have a number of violations, and I'm class 1, I'm probably going to talk out of, but in a certain 18-month time period, they go on probation again. And since they are on probation again, we will be looking at what our next step is in terms of a corrective action for them. We also have Grady, who Grady is our neighborhood family center. They are currently on a corrective
Sorry, Grady, just to make sure we're all talking, it's the Neighborhood Family Center in Clearwater.
In Ridgecrest.
Ridgecrest, thank you.
So Grady is, so our Neighborhood Family Center, they were placed on a corrective action because they did not meet the licensure time period that we had in place. Since then, they have become licensed at the end of June. However, during this time period, there have been other financial matters, situations that have come up. So we have extended the corrective action for them until the end of December. I will be going out and attending their September 15th board meeting, and I have been in contact with the board chair. The other agency is Clearwater Neighborhood Family Center. They are on a performance improvement plan, and they were placed on a performance improvement plan due to financial matters as well, conflict of interest with and board governance and oversight. So we will be monitoring all of those organizations and programs very closely during this time.
Thank you. I do hope and request that we pay particular attention to our neighborhood centers. Their performance is just as important as all of our other funded agencies to maintain that same high quality of performance and expectation, and we should never lower any expectation for our neighborhood centers. And so I appreciate the update today, and I do know under Beth's leadership we'll continue to have that microscopic look and make sure that we're monitoring them just as closely as our other agencies. The way I understand it, our discussion for the last 40 minutes is over, and we now will call to order an official Juvenile Welfare Board Finance Committee meeting on Thursday, April 18th. And I can hand the gavel both over to our chairman. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we'll officially call our Finance Committee meeting to order at 2:40 p.m. All right, so we'll move down to action 2, item B, which is the Finance Committee schedule for 23. Everybody should have got that in your packets. Any discussion on that? If not, we'll take a motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion, changes? Well, all meetings starting at 1:30. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any disapprove? Motion carries. And nothing else we'll talk about on that, right? We'll save the rest for the board meeting.
Just only because everyone has gone through the other ones that were on here. The other board members have heard it. You can quickly, or however long it may take, that took all of 30 seconds, to go through. The other items, action items, you could easily walk through those, ask if there's any questions, and have your same vote. I don't understand why that would have been a problem.
Because what you had before was not a finance committee meeting,
No,
because you
I
had a public discussion.
I
And what the
understand
law says is we can't, these things have to be discussed at a meeting before they're voted on, and so we can't just summarily bring, you can run through them now,
No, you
but
have a
she is.
meeting, you're having a meeting as we speak, so I'm just, hear me out. You're having a meeting as we speak. Very quickly, the others have already, we've all gone through it multiple sets and times. This is probably the third time that we've all reviewed this information. So it's not clear and not known to all of us. If there are any questions, they could be asked again if need be.
I have
And then
no
we could go
problem if
through
she
the
goes
meeting.
through and does it all to make this legal meeting, but you can't just call the questions. You can't just run through and say take a
Didn't we just open a
vote.
meeting? Didn't we just reopen the meeting? We started the meeting later than we said we were going to do. I find this semantically
So what the sunshine law says that this, what just happened prior to the chief getting here is not a meeting because we didn't have a quorum. Okay, it was a public discussion. But when you have a public discussion and then you have a meeting, you still have to go through the action items. You can't just say, okay, now we're going to vote on 2A. So she'll have to just give a very short presentation. I was just suggesting that since she's giving the presentation again at the board meeting anyways, because the board has to vote on all these anyways, it would save time. You can do it. It's up to you guys. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other.
I'll be happy to do it either way. I will not be at the board meeting on the 7th, so I'll have other staff presenting, but I'd be more than happy to do the quick version if that's what you so choose.
I'm okay with it. It's up to the rest of the board if you guys want to move forward with that. Yes, no, yes, okay. You can give us a brief discussion, presentation on each one. We'll have a quick discussion and.
Very good. So the first item on the agenda was approving the fiscal 23 budget changes, and we have two changes from the budget that was last presented at the board meeting. The first one has to do with the change in the fund balance from the ending to the beginning fund balance. That amount is $637,000. The other change has to do with additional information from the county relative to the statutory fees, and that's the fee that they charge us to be able to coordinate and collect our ad valorem funds. So we've got that change. We have certified the proposed millage rates, the 8508 and the rollback rate that was required to be certified back on August 2nd. And we've updated the forecast to break out the COLA and the salary percentages. That was asked upon the board members as well. And so we are recommending a proposed millage rate of 8508 for the proposed millage rate and the preliminary budget before you today.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Laura? Take motion to accept.
Move to accept.
Second?
Motion second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries. All right, item B, or we did B, item C. Charlie.
The board revision policies, so we had last revised the board policies in December of 2020. We try to get to this on an annual basis, but we did do a deeper dive this year. We looked at definitions, we wordsmithed a lot of areas, but there were some areas that I wanted to call to your attention. The first one having to do with attendance. It's really not a change, it's just a clarification as far as if you have a board member who's out for extenuating circumstances. And the memo does not clearly identify that, but the policy is still the same. You have to have a quorum of board members, and then if you have somebody with extenuating circumstances, they can call in and they can vote. Otherwise, we welcome people to call in if they're away from out of town, but not necessarily to fully interact with the board discussion. If they have a stance on one particular issue, they're more than welcome to put that in writing and provide that to the CEO. So that's kind of the change there. Funding process, we wanted to allow the CEO to have a little more leeway in determining reductions and terminations. Eligibility recipients, we now have a handful of agencies that are for-profits, and so we made some changes relative to that to accommodate whether or not they submit an audit to us, whether or not they have to pay sales tax, certain items relative that wouldn't pertain to a for-profit entity. The requirement to require an agency with revenues under $500,000 to be in an ASO, Administrative Service Organization, we are recommending that we remove that. We have several agencies that are in the ASO now that don't meet those requirements. As far as ineligible expenses, again, dealing with the for-profit entities, we would like to allow them to get reimbursed for sales tax. We don't like gas cards being an eligible expense. Capital is an item that should really not be included as a operating budget amendment. And salary adjustments, we're okay with accepting their internal policies relative to a personnel form that would be signed off with any salary increase. As far as the investments, we would like to increase the asset allocation for intergovernmental investment pools to 100%. And then lastly, advances. Our current policy states that we can provide an advance of up to 25% of an allocation, not to exceed $100,000. We would like to raise that threshold to $250,000, as we have a need for some of our agencies to have cash flow requirements and issues, and that threshold amount of 100 had been in place since 2019. Any questions on the board policy revisions?
All right, no questions for Laura. Motion to approve the recommendation revisions.
Second?
Second. All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on to D.
That's me.
All right.
So you may recall that at the December board meeting, we presented personnel policy revisions, 2 new policies, and then some smaller changes. And the board did approve the new policies, which were paid parental leave and our telework policy. But at that meeting, the board asked that future personnel policy revisions come to a smaller committee. And we determined that the finance committee would be that committee. And also asked that those policy changes be reviewed in 9 months from December. So it's August, here we are, we're looking at those policies again, and then we are bringing forward again some smaller changes based on some need to have some new definitions, some misinterpretations by staff of current policy, and then just some legal changes that necessitated a change. On the paid parental leave policy, we decided we wanted to take the lead on this because we are all about children and families, and because of our efforts recently on 0 to 3 and what we've learned about the importance of the first 3 years of life, allowing our JWB staff to spend time with their newborn infant or adopted child followed along with that paradigm. It also aligns with our fatherhood initiative. Fathers are so important in children's lives, and we are promoting that, and we wanted our male JWB staff to be able to have an opportunity to spend time with their youngsters. We haven't had anybody take advantage of the policy just yet, but we do have 1 staff member that we're aware of that is expecting. And we would anticipate that that individual would be able to utilize this policy. The other is the telework policy, and we recommended that to the board in December in response to employee surveys indicating that they liked the remote work situation. They all demonstrated high productivity in the remote working remotely, and of course, practically, there's labor shortages, and it's become an effective recruitment tool. We are recommending, in addition to that policy, which is a residency requirement that we did not have before, we started getting applications from folks, from Minnesota, Texas, and we're like, no. We are about Pinellas County, and we want our staff to understand Pinellas County. So now we are requiring all of our staff to live within a 2-hour commuting distance from JWB. We also did implement return to office guidelines in June to get our staff, now that, COVID is not quite the fear that it was 2 years ago, get our staff back together because we do realize that relationships are critical to the JWB culture, and indoctrinating new staff into that culture is really important, and it's easier to do in in-person basis. So we have definitely had staff in the building this year. Most performance evaluations did occur face-to-face in the office. HR, Sabi and her team are here most days, meeting with staff and doing the in-person orientations. Some executive team members and many managers are here frequently, meeting with staff. This summer we did host a manager training, and departments are meeting in the office, as well as we're strategically scheduling some cross-departmental time with folks. So we're trying to strike a nice balance between maintaining the high productivity, but facilitating the relationship building and the maintenance of our culture. Other than that, the other changes really are outlined in the chart, the table that was included in the materials. By the way, I included a memo, a chart, a red line copy in case you wanted to see the context, and then also a clean copy for people who don't like the messiness of a red line copy. And I know we used a lot of paper, but we're trying to make it as clear as possible. So with that, are there any questions?
No, I think you got some great changes in the personnel policies. Thank you very much. Any questions for Linda? All right, take a motion to approve the personnel policies.
Make motion approved.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. So, since you guys had discussion already, do we need to have that here because it's just discussion?
No, it's just for the law requires us to go through action items in an official meeting before there's voting.
Sure.
That's the only legality that I was concerned about. You guys did it perfectly. If you want to discuss anything else further during the meeting, that would be fine. If you guys are all done discussing, that's fine too.
Okay, perfect. So we'll just jump over to open agenda. Anybody have anything for the Finance Committee? All right, seeing none, we'll move to adjourn. Thank you.
Good job. Woo! I don't, that may break a record.